Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the NAAFA webinar series. I am Tigris Osborne. I'm the Executive Director of NAAFA, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. And for those of you who are new to NAAFA, we are the world's longest running, oldest documented organization working towards fat rights. We work to change perceptions of fat and to end size discrimination, and we do that through education, advocacy, and support. Thank you for being here today for one of our education and support programs, the NAAFA webinar series. To learn more about our other programming, you can visit our website at naafa.org, NAAFA.org. Today, we are joined by Ivy Felicia, who is a wellness coach and the founder of Fat Women of Color, and we're going to talk about all of those things today in just a minute. First, I'd like to introduce you to our interpreters from Pro Bono ASL. Today, we are joined by Lavender and David, who will be interpreting for us today. Do check out Pro Bono ASL and all of their very important work. And please know that even though they are pro bono for many things, we do compensate the organization for our interpreters, and we encourage you to support them. And we want you to know that your support of us helps us support them. So with no further ado, I would like to just get right into things with Ivy. Ivy, actually, if you don't mind, can I have you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Currently with us in this space, or if you're watching the replay, thank you so much for joining us. I am Ivy Felicia, but you can call me Ivy. I am the body relationship coach. I'm a certified holistic wellness coach and body image expert. So I work with people who are experiencing frustration, anger, sadness, any sort of negative feelings or emotions about their bodies. And I specialize in working with people who live with chronic illness, as well as folks who are brown and black. So I have been doing this work for 11 years now. And I love the work that I do. We'll get a little bit into that a little bit later. Fat Women of Color is an extension of that work and was actually born out of that work as a my way to specify my energy by creating community space for Black and Brown women of size.
And for those of you who are with us for the first time, you may have noticed that around these parts, we enthusiastically and affirmatively use the word fat. So please be prepared for that in all of today's discussion. We do recognize that it is a trauma word for some people. And so we encourage you to do whatever you do to take care of yourself around that usage. But we do want you to be aware that it's right there in our name as an organization. It's in the name of lots of the things that Ivy Felicia works on. And so just be ready for that today and take whatever you need. And we hope that it will, if it's new for you, um, that you will move towards it and know that you are supported in this space in doing that. Ivy, can you tell us what is Fat Women of Color? We know what fat is and we know what women of color is, but what is Fat Women of Color as an organization? And what's the origin story of how you came to be doing all of this work around body image, body love, and specifically around women of color for that?
Mhm. So my work around body image and body relationship work and Fat Women of Color all stems, it begins with the foundation of my lived experience, which I say often, I say proudly, because I think it's one thing to um, join a cause because you're passionate about it, you're curious about it, and it's another thing to actually be a part of a cause because it's your lived experience, right? So I have always been in a larger body since I can remember. My pictures in kindergarten, I was a chunkier kid in school. I've always been in a larger body as a Black girl, and so that is a very big part of my experience with my body. And so is chronic illness. And so those two things have shaped the work that I do. I was I found out that I had PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome. For those who don't know that, it is a form of endocrine disorder. I found out about that when I was 17, which was in 1997. It was a long time ago for for some of us. But that's when I first found out that I had a chronic illness. And that began my journey in understanding just sort of the complexities of living in a body that is also chronically ill, as well as being a person of size at the same time. So that has been a part of my story for a very long time. The journey of what I've experienced in going back and forth to the doctors, seeking medical treatment, um, the challenges that I've experienced with, fat phobia at the doctor's office, and just finding things to help me live peaceably in my body are things that I have lived. And then in around circa 2011 is when I was first introduced to holistic wellness. And I had actually never really engaged with holistic wellness before, but it was introduced to me from an integrative doctor. And the reason that I fell in love with it is because that doctor was the first doctor to ever treat me as a whole person. And I feel like this is very important for those of us who live in larger bodies and know what it is to constantly be treated only for your fatness at the doctor's office. This is the first doctor who treated me and asked me about my sleep, asked me about my community, talked to me about stress, and did I have a hobby, and what were my passions, and also like, what's this have to do with, what's going on
Mhm.
with my body? And that's my first introduction to realizing that all of this has to do with me being well as a person. And that really launched me going to school to become a holistic wellness coach, and then beginning my journey in business to work with other folks and teach other folks about the things that I've learned about how to approach wellness from a holistic perspective.
And when you were doing that training, what was
Mhm.
your experience with encountering other women of color in that kind of training, in that professional world? Like, what has that part of it been like for you?
A very good question. So I will say that in going through school, coaching school, that it was actually predominantly white folks. It was very rare that I met back then that you would meet other people of color, definitely not other Black people in the space. It was also very anti-fat. The things that they taught about wellness was very fat phobic. There was a lot of healthism and things like that. So I had to tweak what I learned about coaching and wellness and all of that, because there wasn't really a curriculum at that time that was in size inclusive, right? So um, I actually didn't meet any other Black and Brown people of size while I was going through coaching school.
And I asked that because I'm wondering what you have learned in all of your years of experience from your clients about the difference that they experience working with you versus working with other coaches who don't have the lived experience that you have, who don't have the
Mhm.
identity you have, and and what that means for folks if they want to get into a coaching relationship and they're trying to find someone like you. um, you know, w- what advice do you have for people who are trying to find somebody like you, knowing that there are not that many of you out there?
Yeah. Well, one thing I can say is that my clients have found, and I love this, that because of my lived experience and also because I did my own extensive education outside of coaching, right? So understanding cultural relevancy, like that's what makes me different as a coach, especially when I first started out in this work in 2014, which is 10 plus years ago. There definitely were not very many, you know, Black and Brown people of size wellness at that time. So it definitely helped me to stand out for clients. Um, but I would say for someone who's trying to get into this work, that right now, the best that you can do is take, the wellness coaching programs and things like that, but also get this type of education from organizations like NAAFA, and being around other spaces that teach you, like ASDA and things like that, that teach you about what it means to approach health from a size inclusive perspective.
And for folks who don't know what ASDA is, do you want to tell them?
Yes, the Association for, I'm sorry, I'm getting, getting tongue-tied. The Association for Size, Diversity, and Health. Am I correct? Yes,
Yes,
thank you.
and ASDA is a fat lib and professional organization that serves lots of people in wellness spaces. They are the trademark holders of Health at Every Size, and I do encourage you to check out the the health at every size guidelines that they have recently updated, and you can find all that information on their website, which is asda.org, asdah.org. We work in partnership with ASDA a lot, and encourage you to check out what they are doing, and they are increasingly um, offering events that are very relevant for those who have lived experience as people of color, and also for the rest of you to learn from those perspectives. So, another great resource for places to learn. Thank you for mentioning that, Ivy. So, what about fat women of color as a platform? What, how does that fit into all of this, and what the needs that you were trying to meet when you created that platform?
Yes. So Fat Women of Color, I'm always very honest when when I talk about the birth of Fat Women of Color. Fat Women of Color started as an Instagram. It did not start with me having this elaborate dream or vision of an organization. I wanted to create spaces where Black and Brown women of size could see themselves, right? So that didn't exist on Instagram at the time. There wasn't really, that I know of. There wasn't a space where you saw images of Black and brown women of size in this uplifting space that would amplify voices and things like that. And so I was like, let me start. So there were people that I was following and that had influenced my journey, and I felt like I wanted to just start reposting, and I started from zero. And just started posting pictures and quotes and um, affirming information for Black and brown women of size. And it grew and it took off, and people needed it. You could tell it was something that people needed. And so then, because I had experience with doing other women's community spaces that I had hosted and held and created before, it was like, oh, okay, this needs to be a community, not just an Instagram. People want more. So it just evolved very, very organically over time.
And where is it now? And what are some of the things that you are the most proud of about that evolution?
Yeah, I love Fat Women of Color. It's funny because those of us who are, community space organizers, who are business owners, when you birth something in that way, right? Like an idea or a community, it's sort of an extension. It has I believe it's its own entity, right? Like it's something that I look at and I'm like, oh, I'm very proud of that. Very proud of that. So I love Fat Women of Color. I took a break from Fat Women of Color in 2021. It was right after 2020. Everyone knows what 2020 was like, because if you're still alive, you went through 2020. And for those of us who were, particularly Black folks, 2020 was very difficult. There's a lot of tumultuous things happening in the Black community at that time. Um, Also, we were going through a pandemic as a community. It was all sorts of things happening. And so what's important for me then, I had the Fat Women of Color membership community where people could join, they could come into the community. We were having virtual events because of course we were all in the house, we were kind of locked down. I also had like live work times where everybody could log on together and, work from home and not be alone. I was bringing in speakers for the community just to sort of uplift people. I had Friday Fat Chat that was also going on at the time, which was a space where I would invite Black and Brown women of size to come on, where I would interview them, learn more about them, and hear about what they were doing with their businesses and brands. So all of that was going on in 2020 for me, while navigating all the other things that everyone else is navigating too,
Mhm.
and also being Ivy Felicia and coaching, speaking, teaching, all those things too. So got burnt out in 2021. I did.
And how did you address that burnout?
I did what I told my clients to do and had to be a living example of listening to my intuition and listening to my body. And everything inside of me was telling me that I needed to rest. I did not want to because I was at the peak of it was sort of like, what? I've got all these, I have a community, I have Friday Fat, I have this, I have that. It was not easy. And those who are very close to me know how much I went through privately with making that decision. It was very hard. I felt like I was letting the community down, like, especially we were just coming out of 2020. But I knew that Ivy had to come first. And I had to be that lived example of a Black, fat woman who was choosing herself and her well being first. I cannot teach that and not live it. So I chose to do that.
And how has that gone for you?
um, it was hard at first. It stopped being hard, to be honest. Um, time, I continue doing Ivy Felicia work, coaching work, because that is my my bread and butter. That was the original thing that I had even before Fat Women of Color. Um, but it's also been beautiful at the same time, if you can understand the complexities of that, because I spent the last few years in deep therapy, seeing a therapist once a week, spending a lot of time in rest. And when I mean rest, I mean deep rest, like doing very little of anything other than gardening, spending time with my plants. I did go to herbalism school and during that time as well, but that's a passion. So just a lot of time sewing into me and sitting with myself and dealing with a lot of the things that were in me. And one thing that I learned is that a lot of fat people, sometimes we do too much or we overcompensate because of how we still feel inside, right? From being that if you grew up fat or if you've been in a fat identity for a long time, we are taught and we are programmed that we have to take care of others. It's in everything. It's in TV, it's in media. You're the best friend who's a sidekick to, to the other person. For fat Black women, we're mammified, where we're taught to be caretakers and all of those things. So it's very counterintuitive to choose ourselves. So during that time, I had to do my work in choosing myself over and over again, even when it was uncomfortable and even when there was fear for me that I would be publicly judged by others.
Did did you see during that break the ways that those fears were unfounded, or did you see examples of ways that your fears were not unfounded and things that we need to be thinking about as a community about how we make those kinds of judgments?
I saw both, to be honest. I saw both. Um, there were amazing fat folks like yourself, Tigress, who talked to me and uplifted me and gave me grace and compassion and just reminded me, you are enough, you've done enough. Friends, my fat community was close to me, that I I talk to almost every day. So the past, 3 years, they were there, walking through this journey with me, and well, it was reciprocity. We're walking through it together. Um, However, I also saw that the world and society is programmed to value fat folks for our labor. And when you pause that labor, when you slow down on that labor, people don't value you as much. Not everyone, but it happens often. And the problem. It's-
I think we also see so we are told that our only value is in our labor, but then we're also given a mixed message because people don't treat our labor as though it is valuable.
Mm,
One of the things that contributes to that burnout we see for a lot of fat activists is the fact that most of us are doing this with very, very limited resources as individuals, as organizations, So how did that part affect you, that the pieces around not getting enough other people to do the work, not getting enough money to do the work, not getting enough of the support or networks that some other organizations or individuals have? How did that fit into your burnout?
mm. It was very influential on me delaying resting because of being terrified of, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? Because there's not enough resources for others to do it, right? For me to pay other people to continue fat women. If I had money, I could have paid other people to keep it going while I took a break, right? Or, to have staff, to have help. But I had some people during the time when a lot of donations were coming in during 2020, let's be honest, for Black and Brown organizations, particularly Black folks. We were getting a lot of donations because people were very focused on the Black community at that time. But that dried up quickly, right? And so when that dries up, it's like, well, how do I continue to pay people to help me? And I was paying people to help me and assistants to help me with fat, Friday fat chat, and people to help me with the community and things like that. But you can't keep that going if you don't have resources. So that absolutely did influence my stress. It influenced my burnout. And then I also, had to make the decision of, even though I was supposed to be resting, I still, had to keep Abby Felicia going as well to help maintain the household.
Absolutely, and I mean, and for those people who are newer to NAAFA watching this or here with us today live, just for some context, NAAFA has been for 55 years a predominantly volunteer organization. So we had an executive director for a few years in the 90s, and we've had some part-time administrative help at various points over the years. But for many years, we didn't have any paid employees, and all of the people who were participating in our programming were doing that as volunteers. And so it was a huge shift for us to move towards a sort of abundance thinking about, like, if we build it, they will come, not just for the participants, but also for the donors, because we wanted to be able to do things like offer these webinars for free as we always had, but we wanted to start compensating the guests, compensating
Mhm.
the interpreters, compensating the video editor, and with everything we do, like, we wanted to be thinking about what's and are always thinking about what is the balance between a dependency on volunteer labor, and what does that and making sure that there are people we're compensating. We are now compensating more people in fat community than probably any entity on earth. And also we are still very, very reliant on volunteers. And so thank you, volunteers who are out there listening, and thank you, donors who help support us being able to pay folks and provide these kinds of resources. But one of the things that we know is we've been able to expand representation of people of color because people who could not otherwise afford to donate their time and energy, we are now able to compensate, and that means that there are just a lot more people who can be involved.
Mm.
That's true for fat folks of all colors, but it's especially true for people of color in terms of the work that we're doing here. So I just want to echo some of the things that you're saying about we did not see an influx of money at NAAFA during 2020. I wasn't the director yet, so nobody was thinking of it as a Black-led organization, and NAAFA is not
Yeah.
a person of, people of color centered organization. So we didn't see that influx, um, but we did see continued donor support, and we see, increasing donor support now. So thank you to all of you out there for that. Ivy, how did that limited resource piece, how has that affected your decision to bring fat women of color back after you've had this period of rest? Or what's your plan for that? What's the future for fat women of color?
Yeah. So I knew that when I came back, I was going to be intuitive as well. So it was like, I will know. And I had people, because people who love the organization were like, we miss was it coming back. But I was very conscious of not letting anything rush me. It was very important for me to choose my wellness, my well-being first. And so even in coming back now, I know that I'm going to take a conscious and intentional return with Fat Women of Color. I knew that I wanted this Fat Liberation Month to be a part of that return, but it will look very different. It will look very different for me. It will be a slow return. It will be a gentle return. You'll also see more merging of fat women of color with Ivy Felicia because I think in the past it was okay, but it also contributed to the burnout for me to felt so much separation in the brands. So I do wellness work. And fat people need wellness work. And so, I want to bring more of that to the wellness community, particularly with our current climate, where there is a lot of pressure around weight loss and weight loss drugs and things like that. I love wellness, you all. Like it has helped me in my journey of living with now two chronic illnesses. It has helped me with my mental health. It has helped me with my emotional well-being and all of those things. And so I just want to help people understand that you can take care of yourself without dieting or without launching war on your body, right? So you'll see more of that coming from me and coming through Fat Women of Color as well. You'll see it as a space of resources, offering more size inclusive holistic wellness.
And for folks who are hearing you say this and who understand, like, wellness as a concept might be good for me, but wellness as an industry has not been good for me as a fat person or as a person of color or both. What do you see changing besides yourself being in this industry and making change? Like, are there other trends you see that give you heart and hope, or other things that you would highlight for folks as places to access wellness community that do feel safe and affirming and supportive for fat folks and for people of color?
Mhm. That is something that I definitely want to highlight more as well is people who are affirming, right? When it comes to wellness. And I understand the anxiety and the concern and sometimes even the trauma that people have experienced with their interaction with wellness, right? I too have experienced that. So I understand that there might be some reservation with that. I've been very intentional about following and gathering and finding people who are size inclusive when it comes to wellness. And so I've been highlighting those people on my individual page, but you'll also start to see more of them on the Fat Women of Color page, just to kind of help people find spaces where they can feel nurtured, right? And not oppressed or pressured into weight loss.
And for folks who haven't seen it before, we have on our YouTube channel all of our past webinars. And last year we let off Fat Liberation Month with a chat between Luca from Radical Fitness in Oakland, California, and Kimmy Singh, who is a fat and fat positive nutritionist, dietitian. And so that's a great one to check out if you're looking for some other wellness information from NAAFA. And that's on our YouTube channel, which is NAAFA Official on YouTube. And you can check that out in our many other webinars. Um, Ivy, is there something that you wish more wellness practitioners who don't have your lived experience, like, are there a couple of, like, at least like basic beginner tips that you can give them, or the sort of like foundational ideas for them to think about, because they are going to land with clients who are not from their lived experience. Everybody's not going to find their way to you. We wish
Mhm.
they would, but that, they're going to find their way sometimes to some of these other folks who don't have the lived experience you have. What do you have to say to your colleagues in the field who are those folks?
Yes. So for those people, the number one thing I would say is be open to listening. Because I believe that when you have a privileged identity, that you're used to having power and having voice, right? And I believe that one of the number one ways that you can really become a better coach or wellness practitioner is being open to listening, really hearing the experiences of your client and affirming those experiences, because you can learn too. And I tell my clients, I have coaching groups and things like that. We talk about it in my coaching spaces all the time, that I learn from them too. I don't position myself, above anyone. I am there to facilitate coaching. Yes, I'm there to give them tools and offer them things that they can explore, but I listen to their stories and I hear from them and I learn too. And I feel like that's the number one thing that people who maybe don't have lived experience can do, as well as invest your money in learning from people with lived experience. And what can that look like? That can look like paying people like me or NAAFA or, like you said, Kimmy, other people who that practitioners, pay them to educate you if they're willing to do that, right? Don't just ask them for free education. Pay them to sit down for an hour and talk to them and get information, and don't just assume that you know. Be willing to invest in learning too.
Mhm. Well, and I think across industries and across relationships, that's an important thing for people to remember when you are trying to learn from people who have lived experience that you don't have. Um, you know, offer something in return for that learning.
Mm,
And also understand your relationship. Like, uh people have a tendency to do this sort of like, well, you're my friend, so you'll teach me these things.
mm,
Are you my friend though? Do you know my mama's name? Are you like, are we friends like that? Because if we're not,
mm,
then do approach me the way that you would approach any other professional with expertise, right? You would not just show up at the local university and roll up in a professor's office and be like, I'm here to learn about ancient Greek, and expect that they would just do that for you, right? But we do that all the time to people of color, to fat people, to people in other marginalized identities. And so if you are in a space of being in a more privileged identity and you're going to approach somebody for learning, um often we will are happy to be generous with you if we can be, but we can't always be, and sometimes we're not happy to be generous with you. So think about what your approach is like, I think. um and I'm just wondering if you have any particular um lesson that you've like that we haven't already talked about, that you have learned from being on social media with fat women of color.
mm. I would say the biggest lessons that I've learned is to stay grounded in yourself, because it's ironic, right? Especially those of us who do body image work or body liberation. We frequently talk about how society can shape our concepts of our body, right? But that applies to other things as well. We just talked about this in my coaching group recently, that we have an awareness that society, media, and all those things have shaped our concept of beauty standards, bodies, things like that. But it shapes other concepts of ourselves as well, right? So our work ethic, our self-care ethic, our sense of community, and all those things. So I would say that the most valuable thing that you can have is a relationship with yourself, and really getting grounded in what you need and what you believe. Because every time we see a message on social media, it impacts us. And that having that connection with yourself am I going to keep this information or am I going to, to reject it? Am I going to absorb what I just saw or am I going to release it? Because enough consumption of media will turn you into a different person. It's true for all of us. As much as we want to say that, I have my own concepts of all those things, media does shape us. Sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, but it shapes us.
And do you have any thoughts on how we can help other people, like, learn these lessons and, like and especially younger people? Because
Mhm.
I know that we have, parents, teachers, other caregivers in our audience who might be thinking like, "Well, I've cultivated a social media feed that is affirming for me. How do I teach my young, offspring how to do that?" Do you have any thoughts about, like, how we reach the next few generations of people with this, especially around protecting yourself on social media?
Yeah. I've found that the best way with the young people who are in my life is conversation, right? If possible, because they're not as much into conversation. But I think that when we try to keep them away from social media, or it just draws them to it more, right? And I find that it's better to have that open dialogue about what they're seeing, what they're reading, so that we understand how it is shaping their perception of themselves. Because if we just try to tell them things, we know this from when we were kids, right? When your parents told you things like, you don't know what you're talking about. They have no idea. But really having a dialogue with them about, oh, you saw this, particular celebrity. What do you think about them? Or you see this person getting bullied. How does that make you feel? Or, how do you feel when you see these girls on Instagram? How does that make you feel about yourself? Just the dialogue, I think, opens the door for us to have influence.
And we have an audience question for you, about the Friday Fat Chats that you mentioned. Um,
Okay.
first, uh, where can we still access those?
Yes, they're on the Fat Woman of Color actually has a YouTube channel. It's still there. The interviews are still the ones that were captured on YouTube are there because we didn't start out on YouTube. So after Instagram, what was the feature where you could like I forgot what that feature was back then. But there's several of them on YouTube.
And lots of the even though Fat Women of Color has been on break, all of the stuff on Instagram is still there.
Mhm.
There's like there's lots of I go back to the Instagram from time to time. I just go to the Instagram and look at old pictures because I'm just looking for that representation and that feeling
Mhm.
belonging. But the question was, the audience question was, I was really interested when you were speaking about the fat chats and hearing from fat folks about their experiences. Would you share what themes really stood out or surprised you from what you heard in all of those interviews over the years?
Oh wow. Um. Good. Oh. Um. I would say when we did our pleasure series, um, we did a series on pleasure. And I love that because that's something that we don't talk about often in fat spaces, right? Because we often talk a lot about like work, like activism and things like that. So it was beautiful to have this dialogue with fat folks around pleasure. And I won't give it all away, but there's some like people who are leading in the pleasure fields who had lots of insight to give around owning pleasure and how that is a form of liberation as well. Those are things that forever like resonate in my spirit. So definitely go take a look at those videos. Um, and like you said, Tigress, you actually encouraged me, and I'm glad that you did, to let fat women of color stay there, right? Because it is a catalog, really, right? Like there are some people who are on the fat women of color feed who actually are no longer here or no longer with us. So it is literally a historical catalog of some dynamic and powerful and amazing fat folks. Some are still here, some are not. But their pictures, their quotes, it's just like beautiful. So I'm glad that that is there. Scroll through it and have a good time, like you said, Tyrus, you do.
Well, and we talk a lot about like I get asked a lot about like what the difference is between body positivity and fat liberation,
Mhm.
and and we talk about how this wave of body positivity that we're talking about, really kind of started in the 2000s on Instagram and Tumblr, and a lot of that was women of color. A lot of that was Black women and femmes. It was queer folks, it was disabled folks, it was other people who are outside of the beauty and health norms. And so when we look at what kind of how people think of body positivity today, it often doesn't look like that. But some of
Mhm.
those trailblazers that, that were part of that are captured in the early fat women of color, because those were the people you were following and then, reposting and
Mhm.
exposing other audiences to. So I'm really grateful for that. As I said, for my own personal affirmation, but like you said, as a document of some of what was happening, years ago on Instagram, and how the ripple effects of that have impacted everything. What do you think about the difference between body positivity and fat liberation?
Yes, I actually just did a post on this just this week. Um, but that is on Fat Woman of Color and obviously. But yeah, I of course it's been co-opted. I feel like it's another form of colonization, to be honest, and erasure. And I feel like and a lot of people have moved in reclamation. I feel like we need to continue to move in reclamation. And that's why that spaces like this are so important so that we can reclaim things that we already started, that we
Do
were
you
the
have
founders.
Sorry. Do you have any hope that folks who were some of the co-opters, or folks who unintentionally shifted the spotlight away from the people who started body positivity, fat folks and all the other folks that I just mentioned, do you have hope that some of those people can be radicalized or politicized and sort of like brought in, or does capitalism just kind of water it all down too much to utilize the tools of some of those folks, or to reach their audiences, or any of that?
So, in hearing you ask that question, like what just popped into my head, I used to be a teacher. I was in early childhood education. And one of the most effective ways to shape behavior is positive reinforcement, right? And I think that there's a lot of reinforcement for certain behaviors, and that's why we continue to see them. And what you're saying is capitalism, right? There's a lot of financial reward. There are major platforms that reward those messages. And so it just continues to perpetuate that. So I think that there's hope, but I think that, um, more difficult because that type of messaging is positively reinforced. It goes along with the agenda.
Well, how do you reconcile uh the many of the resources are over here, and those people have a different motivation than we do, but we need some
Mhm.
of those resources? How do you reconcile that in your work, and in thinking about the future of fat women of color, and who you will or will not work with?
Mhm. So when you say reconcile, can you clarify it for me just a little bit?
Like, how do you make peace with the idea that
Mhm.
you may work with some folks who share some of your values, but not all of your values, or whose motivations are different, but that sort of question of, do the ends justify the means? If XYZ company is making a product for fat people, and we know they don't really care about fat people, but they've got the money, they've got the platform, they've got the whatever. And when we see this come up in everything from, whether we work with beauty brands as an organization, to whether influencers work with pharmaceutical companies, like there's all kind of ways that that shows up in our community as a question that we have to grapple with. And I'm wondering how you grapple.
Yeah. I think it goes back to a little bit of our earlier conversation, right? Where there is the need for survival in some ways, right? And also for me, I know everybody's not spiritual, but I am a very spiritual being. And so I do stay very connected to my spirituality, to believe that what I'm doing that I call it my divine team is actually supporting me. So for me, that means creator, angels, and ancestors. And so I believe that I'm here for a reason. This is part of that reason, and it will be supported. Um, as long as I stay, within my mission and my goal. And that's shown up in a lot of different ways for me. So I try to stay focused on that and maintain integrity above all. So in me choosing something to do or not to do, I operate from integrity as much as possible. And also keeping the mission in mind because we do want people to get this information. We do want people to get these resources. So I feel like it's a balance between um, trusting the divine for me and maintaining integrity.
You have mentioned that you are um that you are dealing with some medical changes, health changes
Mhm.
for yourself. And so we have a question from the audience. What type of emotional work have you done as medical conditions developed? For me, a fat African American that started with arthritis, then cancer, one, two, three autoimmune illnesses, then other conditions, trying to exercise through pain. I've had to continue to lift my spirit day by day, hour by hour, had to be my own motivational coach every single day. What do you do to lift your spirit with your conditions?
That's a very meaningful question.
Mhm.
um, I feel like this reflects back to the beginning of our conversation where I had to be intentional about choosing Ivy first, right? And the more that I do that and remind myself that that is of utmost importance, that guides my decisions, right? So for me, in practical application, that looks like community. So I have my own friends and family that I stay connected to. I make sure that I talk to those people, that I spend quality time with those people. That also looks like investing in my mental health. And I know that, actually formal therapy is not affordable for everyone, but there are organizations that offer sliding scale therapy. That's on the Fat Women of Color page as well. That can support you in those areas as well. Um, Rest. Um, a lot of things that I help clients with, like that's actually what I help people, with, right? Like figuring out how to take care of your body when you're chronically ill in a way that is accessible for you. Because I
Mm,
don't believe that there is a prescriptive way for everyone. Every single person in this live or watching this video has a different body and a, a different way that their body and their wellness needs to be taken care of. So what I help people do is figure out what does that look like for you. So, for me, that looks like making sure that at night before I go to bed, I take a shower. When I'm putting on oil in my body, I talk to my body, I slow down. I light candles, I listen to music. Some things are very accessible in that way, and other things might be a little more investment, like finding a therapist or finding a membership community with folks who can be affirming. So I would say be willing to explore what you need and prioritize yourself first.
mm. That's a beautiful word to wrap up, Ivy. Is there anything that we didn't ask you about today that you wish we had asked you about?
No, this has been a beautiful interview. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you, Tigress. You've been an amazing host. And thank you for everyone who's watching.
Well, thank you for being with us. And we are so excited to welcome the return of Fat Women of Color at whatever pace works for you. And will you tell folks where they can find you and find more information about you in the meantime?
Yes. So my website is ivyfelicia.com. You can also find me on all the spaces under I am Ivy Felicia. Um, those are the main places to find me, and then you'll find all the other things there. So if you find me and get on my mailing list, the number one thing is to get on my mailing list because then I email my mailing list weekly with tools, all the things that we've been talking about here, some of the questions that were asked. I offer tools, I offer practices, I offer reflections for people to learn how do you take care of your body when you're chronically ill? How do you nourish yourself as a person of size from a non-diet perspective, right? So that's the number one way to stay connected with me. You'll get all the other things from me.
Well, and I will echo that from us. If you are not already subscribed for NAAFA's mailing list, you can do that at our website. You can see our upcoming events. It is Fat Liberation Month. We have more virtual events during this 1 month of the year than we have, at any other given concentrated period of time. So you can sign up for an all access pass, which will get you the emails and the Zoom invitations to every single virtual event that we add for the month. There are one or two that have very specific focus. So if you do not match those affinities, you won't attend those events, but everything else is open to people of all sizes and all identities, and we welcome you to join us. We are only able to provide all of this programming free to our community because of the generous support of our donors. If you are able to give to NAAFA, please go to go do it right now. If you are able to go to naafa.org/give and make a donation in whatever amount seems meaningful to you. People who donate during Fat Liberation Month will get a cute little thank you sticker featuring our adorable artwork by Bats Langley. And if you join our NAAFA pod, our passionate ongoing donors group, which is people that give every month, then there's a second special Bats Langley sticker for you during Fat Liberation Month only. So to do that by the end of August if you can. And we will look forward to seeing you also doing things like signing the petition for the campaign for size freedom, which is available at our website, checking out the information about our new campaign to encourage Southwest Airlines to prioritize accessibility for fat people and disabled people as they make many, many changes to their seating policies and planes and all the things. So there's lots and lots of stuff going on from NAAFA right now, but all of it takes support in order for us to continue to execute it. So once again, if you are able, please do make a donation today. Thank you again to Ivy. Thank you to Julianne behind the scenes and to all of the NAAFA Communications Committee for all of the ways that they support the NAAFA webinar series. And of course, thank you to our interpreters today, David and Lavender from Pro Bono ASL. We will see you at already on Thursday. We have another event. It's an episode of Ahead of the Curve featuring our fashion director, Marcy Cruz, who is interviewing Bertha Pearl of Size Queen Clothing this week. So we will see you for that one and many, many more things. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.